Hi everyone, today is World Kidney Day and Consilia has chosen the Yorkshire Kidney Research to be our chosen charity for the year. So we're sat down today with my colleague Kieran to have a rather personal discussion about why we've chosen the charity and to give us his story basically. So let's start with you, Kieran. Start with the story really, your life.
Yeah, so when I was 13, I was diagnosed with kidney failure. By that time I realised it had actually reached end stage because very little symptoms, so it's rapidly moving, fast moving kind of disease. So I was put on dialysis at 13 years old, went through all of that, had a transplant at 16 years old, which worked for around 3 years, and then it started to drop off and that eventually stopped working. So I went back on dialysis when I was 19. I got a transplant relatively soon then. But that unfortunately was an unsuccessful transplant, so I remained on dialysis from that point. So I've recently had my third kidney transplant, which I've waited 7 years for, so I'm 27 now. I was waited for 7 years waiting for that.
Wow, that's a long time. So, as you said, what's it day to day? So you've had it for such a long time. How's your day to day gone? Is there changes in your diet, anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. So there's loads of things day to day for anyone with kidney failure to juggle with. So no matter what stage kidney failure you're at, you're going to have something there that you need to be careful about. So for me, on the extreme end, having end stage kidney failure, my day to day things were, first of all, what's your fluid intake? Basically, because you've no kidneys or no kidney function, you're not producing any urine. And so your body can only hold so much fluid before it becomes dangerous. So I could only drink 1 litre of fluid over a 24-hour period. Now, the thing about this is, you've got to accommodate so much of that to take medication. And when you're taking 35 and 40 tablets a day, it takes a lot of fluid to get them down. So a lot of fluid is taken up by that as well. So fluid intake is one thing. You're on quite a few diets, so you can't eat any foods that are high in potassium, high in phosphate, high in salt, high in calcium. Those sorts of things are really dangerous because if you have too much potassium, because your kidneys aren't filtering that potassium out of your blood, it builds up. And the problem with high potassium is you are very likely to go into cardiac arrest. The problem with high phosphates is you're very likely to have a stroke. So all these things are really dangerous. So you're really restricted with what you can eat. You have to eat some boring stuff. Toast is the safest thing. Just have toast 3 times a day, you'll be fine. And for some patients, this isn't true of all patients, but it was true for me, I suffered really severe weight loss as a result of not being able to eat all these things. But then because you're so tired from treatment and this, that and the other, your appetite's low anyway. So with a low appetite and then not having a great deal of choice in terms of what you can and can't eat, you know, weight loss is something that's going to hit you. And I've struggled to gain weight since. I've known a few patients like that. It's not true of everyone, but it is true of some. And so there's all these knock-on effects of it.
Is that what the kidneys do then? Do they filter?
Yeah. So the job of your kidneys are your body's regulators. So naturally, the problem is if you've not got any kidneys, you've got no regulation in your body, which throws everything out of whack. So for everything else then, you're medicated to keep those things sort of checks and balances with everything else until such time you get to transplant if you're on the list, for example. So things like your blood pressure is regulated by your kidneys. So I was heavily medicated with unmedicated, my blood pressure would reach 230 over 170. It was ridiculous. How I never had an cardiac episode, I don't know. But those are the sort of levels it would reach unmedicated. So you've got blood pressure for one thing, and then obviously you've got your diets and food restrictions to monitor, to semi-regulate what's going on in your blood. And then dialysis would sort of run alongside those diets. So dialysis in itself doesn't help. You need to have all these extra things, like the diets, like the food restrictions, like the medications on top of that to keep things roughly in check.
How does dialysis work then? Because I know you've mentioned it a few times, you've been on it at different stages.
Yeah, so in terms of dialysis, there's different kinds of dialysis. The one that I've been on 2 times, but the main one I've done over the last 7 years is hemodialysis. So where that works is, I would go to the hospital 3 days a week, every week. The dialysis would take 4 hours each time, and then you'd have sort of half an hour either side of that, just for things like getting your weight, blood pressure, getting the machine prepped and stuff. So the 4 hours treatment doesn't start until they press the start button, and then it's 4 hours. So I was there at the hospital sort of 5 hours per day, 3 days a week, every week for 7 years. Because the problem with missing dialysis sessions is, one, it's dangerous, because obviously, like I mentioned earlier, your potassium just builds up and up and up, and your fluid will build up and up and up, and you're going to end up severely ill in hospital. And the other problem is, if you want a transplant, you need to be on the list. And the only way you get on the list is to attend all your dialysis sessions. Because the view is, because there's a shortage of organs, the view is that if you are not going to take care of yourself when you're at your most vulnerable, i.e. go to dialysis, can you be trusted to take care of an organ should you get one? And that's the view they take, because they see, if you're not taking care of yourself on dialysis, they think, well, you're not going to look after this kidney, it could go to someone else who will look after it, who's looking after themselves and doing everything they can to keep themselves safe now. So there is criteria. It's not a God-given fact that everyone who needs a transplant will automatically get on the list.
Oh, right, okay.
So some of them don't go on because medically they can't have a transplant. So for other medical reasons, they wouldn't sort of be able to get through the surgery, for example.
Right, okay,
So if people like of a certain age, people with heart conditions or any other major medical issue. But then there's those who just, and there are people out there, because I've met them, and it's not something people like to talk about, but there are people out there who don't look after themselves. And so, you know, they're not always entitled to a transplant.
No, and how does, because obviously it's a really long time in the hospital, how has that worked with you for obviously school and then work as well?
Yeah, so they've always been really flexible with, so I've gone through school, I've done my GCSEs, my A-levels, my degree, my masters, and started my career all on dialysis, because I've not really had much of a break in between. I had one transplant, it was a 3-year break, which I was grateful for. That got me through my A-levels. Then that was it. So I've always sort of been on dialysis when I've tried to do stuff. So I've always had the flexibility. When I started here, I was on dialysis. I was at the unit sort of 5 hours a day, 3 days a week. But I was full-time here, so what I do is I used to just sit and work on dialysis, because the point of the treatment is you just sit there and the machine does the work. It's tiring and it's draining, but sitting there for 4 hours with nothing to do is not the one.
No.
So I did used to sit and work on dialysis, and then when I'd finish, I'd go home and then work from home for the rest of the afternoon. And then with university, they were pretty flexible. I mean, obviously, if I could work full-time on there, university is not much of a challenge really to accommodate that.
And what's the support system like at the hospital?
So in terms of the dialysis units themselves, so I was at the same unit the entire time. So you know, when you're with the patients and the staff, they're always the same. So you do build a relationship with them. You know, I think sometimes with patients and staff, it can be. It's not just a normal professional staff-patient relationship, because when you see these people 15 hours a week, every single week, you know, for 7 years, you're not going to have a professional relationship with them, are you? So you're close with people. There's a lot of support within the units. You can get community support, and even now when you've had a transplant, there are post-transplant nurses, so there's a team of nurses there. If you want to talk to anyone, you can. You've got your consultants and your doctors and everybody else, and there's a lot of other support out there. Yorkshire Kidney Research is one charity which offers support just in terms of events and stuff for patients going through these things, and then there's all sorts of other charities and organisations as well.
And on your, so obviously you've got a transplant now, so how does that all work? What happened on that day when it all came through?
On the day, I was actually working from home on the day I got called in, and I got a phone call around 11 in the morning to say, there's a kidney available for you. Now, I wasn't expecting this. Just to tell you how much of a turnaround you can get. 4 months before I got this, I was told I'd been listed so long, and because I was waiting for my 3rd transplant, it's more difficult to get them. So I was told, you need to start looking into live donor options, because you're probably not going to get one off the list at this rate, because you've been waiting for this much time. You know, how likely is it that one's going to become available? So I started looking into live donor. My best mate put himself forward, started getting tested, and then I got a call, and there's one off the list 4 months later, after waiting 7 years. So they do come out of nowhere. and I was in the middle of work. So normally for most people, the first person you ring is a partner or a member of your family. I had to ring my boss to say I need to stop working right now because they rang me at 11. I had to be at the hospital from about 12:15. So I had to like tools down and go. So yeah, that's basically how it works. And then so you go to the hospital. You usually wait around 6 or 7 hours before you go to the theatre because they have to do all your testing. They have to wait for the organ to get there. They'll look at the organ to make sure, right, has it been damaged in transit? Is it good and suitable for transplant? I've known patients that have gone wait for 8-9 hours and then been told the kidney's no good, you need to go back home. That happened to one person last year actually, and then 2 weeks later he got called in again, and that went absolutely well. So it does happen. They also do a mini transplant in the lab, so they'll use the blood, so your blood is not in storage from previous tests. You have to consent to them storing samples of your blood for cases like this. They'll do a mini transplant with the blood and the cells in the lab to make sure everything's compatible, so that there's no danger to you when they put the kidney in. And then you'll go to theatre, but it depends where the kidney's coming from. So for me, I don't know whereabouts it came from. I know it was a longer distance, so it wasn't a local one this time. So I got to the hospital about 12:30 lunchtime. I didn't actually go to theatre until just after midnight because it was coming from a distance, but in addition to that, there was a delay in the surgery of removing my daughter's organs at the other end. So there's all these other things, so it can be a long day before you get to theatre.
Oh, and I know we've spoken about this before, about the myth that once you've got a transplant, that's it. If you could just go over what the myth is.
Yeah, so the idea is that what some people think, and it's due to lack of information out there, that once you get a transplant, you sorted, everything's fine. Which to a degree it is. I'm currently go to the hospital once a month. That will space out, so I'll get to once every 3 months, which compared to 3 days a week, for 5 hours each time is huge. So you have got the freedom, you can eat and drink what you want as much as you want, so all that goes out the window. There's medications to take, but nowhere near as much as what there would have been. But this idea that a transplant resolves everything isn't true, but it is what a lot of people tend to think due to lack of information. So a transplant isn't actually a cure, it's just another form of medication, it's an extreme form of medication. So the average kidney transplant will work for between 10 and 12 years. Obviously my first will work for 3 years, so there are then that work less. I know someone who's had one for about 24 years, so there are then that work a lot longer than you think as well, or than you'd expect. So it depends on the kidney, it depends on how you look after it, and this, that and the other, so there are various factors to it. But whether it lasts a short time or a very long time or somewhere in the average sort of threshold, the day is going to come where it's going to start, you know, the function's going to start decreasing, and you are going to need another transplant, and chances are you're going to need to go back on dialysis in the interim before another transplant becomes available, unless you're doing something like the live donor system, because you can build that up while your current kidney's still working. So as soon as they see a decrease, they'll say, right, what do you want to do? Do you want to work someone up? Because we can just put another kidney in, and then once that one stops working, it'll all filter to the new one. And they'll do it that way to prevent you going on dialysis. But those cases are few and far between, so most people do end up back on dialysis for a period of time.
Well, that's super interesting, thanks so much. And it's really exciting to obviously be doing a charity that's obviously very close to you and close to all of us now.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of research, you know, it's from all angles. It's not just about the dialysis and the transplant kind of thing, it's from all angles. So it would be, for example, just helping people in terms of the diet, you know, what research can we do in terms of medications to lessen the burden? Can we make dialysis less aggressive as a treatment, so it's less tiring, less draining? There is research going on into transplants, obviously we've got stem cell research and all of this, but in terms of funding in kidney research, it is very limited. It is, because the awareness isn't out there, and so to pick a charity where we can not only raise funds, but also raise awareness of, you know, varying kidney diseases, and transplants and the need for more information, that's good. That's a good thing.
And provide support as well, because obviously if there's such a lack of awareness, there'll be a lot of people in your situation.
And you know, kidney failure, I can't remember the exact statistics, but it affects a lot more people in this country than you'd ever imagine. So, you know, there are a lot of people in this country living with it, but albeit silently, if you like, because it's not something that's in the press all the time, like other sort of issues are. So,
it's great to have a chat with you and go over it, and you really like me and really broaden my awareness. So yeah, it's great. I hope we'll be launching lots of other things today on the World Kidney Day, and keep an eye out for all our other events and fundraising. Thanks very much.